We started the day early, boots crunching across the icy ridges under a sky as wide and blue as a glacier dream. It was my second mountaineering trip to Alaska, though I still wouldn't call myself an expert. Experienced enough to know what I was doing, but far from fearless. Our group was tight-knit, built on years of shared hikes, broken gear, and quiet conversations in storm-battered tents. 5 of us, all roped together in a loose line as we crossed the ice. Kevin up front, then Julia, me in the middle, followed by Chris and Daniel. The glacier was beautiful in that indifferent way mountains always are: massive, ancient, and utterly unbothered by human presence. Crevasses yawned open here and there, jagged blue mouths that seemed to breathe cold air up from the depths. We were careful, taking our time, checking our footing. The sun was bright but low, casting long shadows across the uneven surface, making the ice shimmer like shattered glass. We were in good spirits. There was laughter, the occasional jab or joke traded across the rope lines. Chris had brought a ridiculous thermos shaped like a penguin, which made everyone roll their eyes, and Kevin was taking pictures with that fancy DSLR he always lugged around, the one he swore took better photos than phones ever could. For a while, it all felt perfect. Just crisp air, blue sky, and the quiet companionship of people who know when not to speak. That kind of silence isn't empty. It's earned. About 2 hours in, the fog rolled in, sudden and thick, like someone had spilled milk across the horizon. I've seen glacier fog before, but never like this. It didn't creep. It swallowed. 1 minute we were bathed in sunlight, and the next we were in a whiteout. Visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet. The sunlight faded into a muted, ghostly glow. The edges of our group blurred. The world turned quiet in a different way. Not peaceful, but muffled. Like we'd been sealed off. We stopped to regroup. Standing still on the glacier in the fog felt like floating in a blind ocean of ice. The snow beneath our crampons didn't crunch anymore, it whispered. Everyone tightened their jackets, adjusted their goggles. The fog made it hard to tell what direction we were facing. Kevin took another photo, the shutter clicked absurdly loud in the silence. Then, casually, he said he'd seen something beneath the ice. No one took it seriously. We all assumed it was another of his attempts to spook Julia. She hated horror stories, and Kevin loved pushing buttons. He made a gesture, pointed at the ground somewhere near his boots. The rest of us laughed it off, shook our heads. The fog was probably messing with him. The ice could play tricks on the eyes, especially in low visibility. Shadows, depth, refractions. We'd all seen strange shapes under the surface before. Logs, rocks, sometimes even old, half-buried gear. It didn't mean anything. Still, there was a subtle shift after that. Nothing anyone said out loud. Just an unspoken unease that settled over us. Jokes quieted. Movement became more purposeful. The rope lines between us felt heavier. We were standing there, adjusting gear when we heard it. A sound, faint but clear. Sharp. 3 soft knocks. From beneath the ice. At first, no one reacted. We stood still, letting the sound hang in the fog. I felt it in my boots more than I heard it. A dull vibration through the soles, almost too subtle to notice. Like someone tapping on a glass window from below. Another knock. Then silence. It could have been anything. Air pockets, shifting, ice settling. Maybe even our own crampons clinking against something hollow. My brain reached for rational explanations. Catalog possibilities. Altitude messes with your senses. Cold air carries sound in strange ways. I'd read about hikers hearing phantom voices in the wind. It didn't mean anything, but the silence that followed felt aware, as if whatever had made the noise was waiting. Kevin didn't say anything this time. He just stared at the ground, unmoving. We moved on. No one wanted to stop again until we reached the ridge. The fog didn't lift, but it thinned slightly, enough that we could make out the darker shapes of the rock face ahead, the sharp break between ice and stone. We started toward it, slower now, legs heavy from the climb and the tension. That's when I noticed it. A subtle, almost imperceptible shifting underfoot. Not a vibration, not pressure. It felt like the glacier itself was adjusting. Not cracking or groaning. We would have heard that. It was more like it was sliding. No, not sliding. Following. I stopped walking. Just paused for a second. The sensation stopped. I took a step forward. The ice beneath my feet shifted again, almost like a second echo. Like something just beneath the surface was mirroring my step a fraction of a second later. I looked back at Julia. She had stopped too. Her expression was blank, but her body was tense. Chris and Daniel were still moving slowly, unaware. Kevin hadn't said a word since the knocks. I took another step. A moment later, so did the shadow beneath the ice. It wasn't precise, not like footsteps, more like pressure patterns, subtle changes in the way the snow compressed. But the rhythm matched. When we moved, it moved. When we stopped, it stopped. I didn't tell anyone what I noticed. Not then. It felt too absurd. My thoughts kept looping, pressure pockets, shifting snow layers, illusions from the fog and fatigue. Anything but what it really felt like, being shadowed from below. By the time we made it to the ridge, my legs were trembling, and not just from exertion. The fog was still thick behind us, draping the glacier in white silence. The ice stretched on forever like a frozen sea. Nothing moved now. Not beneath us. Not around us. Still, when I took off my pack and sat on the rock, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't crossed the glacier alone. Not really. We kept walking. No one said much after we left the ridge. The fog had lifted slightly, enough to see the shapes of each other more clearly. But everything still felt muffled, like the world was swaddled in cotton. Visibility was just good enough to keep moving. Barely. The usual banter was gone, swallowed by the sound of our own boots and the dry click of crampons against ice. The rope between us swayed with every shift in weight, each step like a silent question. None of us admitted what we'd all felt, or heard, or imagined, but the silence told me enough. The sense of being watched hadn't faded. If anything, it deepened. Each time my foot came down, I listened, not with my ears, but through my bones, through the ice. A subtle echo, a delayed step, the memory of pressure, not quite matching the rhythm. I thought maybe it was just me. Altitude, stress, nerves. But then I saw Kevin hesitate, just for a heartbeat. The way his head tilted, as if listening to something no one else could hear. I saw Julia stumble, Chris glancing back too often. Daniel kept tightening his jacket sleeves over and over, not for warmth, but as a kind of nervous tick. It was under us. Still, the sensation came and went. Sometimes it was gone long enough that I convinced myself it had never been there to begin with. Then I'd catch that faint impression again, that slight shift in the snow, as though something massive but slow moved beneath the surface, mirroring us. Not perfectly, just close enough to notice if you were paying attention. And we were paying attention. We picked up speed without saying it. The rope grew tighter. No one complained about the pace. No one asked to rest. The air seemed colder. The sky turned that flat, silver gray that makes everything feel like the inside of a snow globe. There were no sounds except for our movement. The scraping metal, the steady breath, and just beneath it all, that vague, impossible sensation of being pursued by something buried in ice. We reached the next ridge by early evening. It was a sharp rock shelf that jutted out of the ice like the spine of some long-dead creature. The glacier curved below us in all directions, smooth and white and indifferent. We pitched camp in the gravel and snow just beyond the ridge, far enough from the ice that it felt safe. Or at least safer. The ground here was hard and uneven, but real, solid rock, not something that could shift and groan beneath your feet. We set up tents quickly. The sky was already darkening. The temperature was dropping fast. No one complained about the cold. Later, after dinner, we huddled in the largest tent to escape the wind. The glow of headlamps flickered against nylon walls as we checked gear, adjusted boots, thumbed through phones to review the day's photos. It was a habit by now, a way to unwind, kill time, share small victories. Kevin, of course, had the best shots. He always did. The light through the fog. The contrast of blue ice against gray sky. A good frame of the ridge with Julia in the foreground, her silhouette sharp and solitary. I started scrolling through my own phone, mostly out of boredom. My fingers were stiff with cold, and my gloves made the screen too sensitive, but I tapped through anyway. Glacier. Boots. rope, a few foggy selfies. One photo, taken sometime just before the fog had fully descended, caught my eye. It showed Kevin ahead of me, walking along the ice. His figure was blurred slightly from movement. The glacier stretched out in front of him, flat and pale, ridged like an old scar. Behind him, faintly visible through the cloudy surface, something dark curled upward. I frowned, zoomed in. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, maybe a patch of exposed stone beneath the ice. But the longer I looked, the more it shifted into focus. A shape, the curve of a head, features, indistinct but unmistakable, a face, pressed against the underside of the glacier. Eyes wide, mouth open in a soundless scream, as if frozen mid-breath. The hands are what I now saw as hands, clawed upward, palms flat, fingers bent, skin pale against the ice. It didn't look alive. It didn't look dead, either. I couldn't breathe for a second. Just stared at it, trying to make it something else. A fissure, a trick of the light, a smudge on my lens. But no, it was there. Trapped, reaching, watching. Kevin looked over my shoulder and saw the photo. His reaction wasn't loud, but it was visceral. His body jerked back slightly. His expression changed. And from that point on, he said nothing. Nothing at all. He didn't sleep that night. I could hear him shifting in his tent. The restless crunch of sleeping bag fabric. The occasional exhale that sounded too sharp, too alert. At some point, I thought I saw the glow of his headlamp flicker on, just briefly, then vanish. I didn't call out. I didn't want to talk about the photo. I didn't want to hear anything else. We'd all seen enough. The wind outside picked up around midnight. It howled against the ridge, buffeting the tents with sharp flurries. I curled deeper into my bag, numb fingers tucked under my armpits for warmth, trying to shut out the cold. Trying to forget the way those eyes had stared through the ice. The way the hands had looked like they were still moving. Sleep came slowly, uneasy, broken. I dreamed of snow falling upward, of something buried and breathing. I woke once to the sound of footsteps, real, soft, moving just outside the tent. But no one called out. No one checked in. When I finally opened my eyes again, the tent was filled with thin, pale light. Morning had arrived. Quiet, gray, cold. And Kevin was gone. His gear was still in his tent, sleeping bag half unzipped, boots set neatly beside his pack. Everything in place. Except him. We searched the immediate area, called his name, checked the ridge line, the path we'd taken the day before. The glacier stretched out below, vast and silent. At the edge of the snowfield, a line of footprints led away from the camp. Only one set. Kevin's. They trailed off toward the glacier, back into the fog, back toward the ice. The morning Kevin vanished. None of us spoke for a long time. The wind had dropped. Even the air seemed to hesitate, holding still in anticipation of something. His absence wasn't loud. It was quieter than it should have been, like the world didn't want to acknowledge it. We stared at the footprints. 5 pairs where we'd stomped around camp. One trail, separate, solitary, meandering toward the glacier. No return prints. No sign of struggle. Just Kevin's deliberate, slightly offset stride leading back into the white silence. We argued, of course. Not loudly. Nothing felt loud anymore, but with clipped tension, all of us talking over each other in half sentences and fray breaths. Some wanted to turn back, go straight to the ranger station, call in help. But the signal was weak out here, barely functional. 2 red bars, flickering like a dying flame, and even then, no connection. Chris tried, pacing in a circle, phone held aloft like a torch, but nothing went through. We were too deep in. There was guilt in the air, a silent accusation none of us dared speak. We'd all seen the photo. We'd all felt something moving beneath us. And still, no one had watched him. No one had stopped him. Eventually, without reaching a real agreement, we followed the footprints. The snow was shallow over the ice, blown thin by the wind, so his trail was easy to spot. The prints moved steadily, confidently, as if he knew exactly where he was going, which made it worse. Kevin wouldn't have wandered. He was cautious, calculated. His last steps hadn't been made in confusion. They'd been made in decision. We followed him for nearly an hour. The farther we went, the heavier the silence grew. The glacier stretched endlessly ahead, flat and pale and indifferent. Fog drifted in low, thin sheets, curling along the edges of visibility like smoke. The ice beneath our feet creaked occasionally, just enough to keep our nerves frayed. The kind of noise you feel in your spine more than your ears. Then the prints ended. Not faded, not scattered. Ended. They stopped at a sheer dip in the glacier. A slope that bent downward suddenly, smooth and crystalline, too steep to walk but too shallow to call a crevasse. Just beyond the last print, the snow was untouched. No indentations, no drag marks, just ice. It was as if he'd walked to that point and been plucked away. Not fallen, not tripped, taken. Someone whispered something about crevasse collapses, that maybe the ground had given way and covered itself. But the ice was solid, smooth, unbroken. Julia suggested it was just a trick of the light, hard shadows and optical illusions. But she wouldn't stop rubbing her gloved hands together, like she was trying to wring something invisible off her skin. I peered over the drop. Nothing. Just a glassy curve that faded into fog. But beneath the surface, just below where his footprints ended, something dark flickered. Not a shadow. A shape. Faint and slow-moving, like a fish drifting under frozen water. Then it was gone. We stayed longer than we should have, milling around the edge like moths circling a flame. There was nothing to find, no trace of him, just the heavy, invisible pressure of something watching. As we turned back toward camp, the ice felt different. The crunch under our boots no longer sounded hollow. It sounded thin, brittle, like we were walking on a shell that had begun to crack. Flickers kept appearing at the edge of my vision. Blurs, shapes. Once I thought I saw fingers pressed against the underside of the ice, dragging along as we walked, but when I turned to look, there was nothing. Just warped air, refracted light, shifting snow. Chris kept muttering about stress, about altitude sickness and collective hallucinations. He didn't sound convinced. Daniel said nothing. He hadn't said much since Kevin disappeared. He just kept staring down at his feet, careful with every step, like he was afraid the ice would open at any moment and pull him in. Back at camp, the tents looked smaller, flimsier. The ridge no longer felt high or safe. It just felt closer to the sky, exposed, vulnerable. That night, the wind returned. I crawled into my sleeping bag early, not because I was tired, but because I couldn't bear to be outside anymore. The dark had taken on weight. The shadows between the tents seemed to pulse. I zipped myself in and listened to the air tremble outside. I didn't know if the others were asleep. No one had checked in. No one wanted to. I dreamt. I was on the glacier again, alone. The sky was gone, replaced by white, endless space. I walked, and each step felt heavier, like I was being pulled down. The snow was deep, but it didn't slow me. My body moved without thought. I looked down and realized I wasn't walking. I was sinking. The ice melted beneath me, becoming soft, thick, translucent. I passed through it, not falling but descending. The cold didn't bite. It enveloped. Above me, the surface became a distorted lens. I could see faint shapes moving, outlines of my friends pacing at camp. They didn't see me. I tried to scream, but my mouth filled with ice. My lungs tightened. My body froze, suspended just beneath the surface. I clawed upward, hands open, palms flattened. The surface didn't yield. I woke up gasping. My bag was soaked with sweat. My breath came in ragged bursts. I tore the zipper down and shoved my way into the night air. The wind had died again. The sky was low and gray. One of the tents was empty. I stumbled toward the edge of the glacier, heart thudding against my ribs. The fog clung to everything. It took a moment to see him. Daniel. He stood at the very edge where the glacier began again. Feet planted, arms limp at his sides, head tilted upward, listening. His boots were still, too still. I stepped closer. They weren't just frozen in place. They were fused to the ice. Not buried, not stuck, merged. The outer shell of each boot had become part of the glacier, as if the ice had risen around him, not just holding him but claiming him. He whispered something. The words were broken, barely audible. He said someone had called to him. He said they were still calling. After Daniel, everything broke apart. Chris and Julia stopped speaking altogether. Their faces were drawn tight with windburn and exhaustion, but behind their eyes was something worse, a quiet, shuddering panic that had calcified into silence. I couldn't tell if they were angry, terrified, or simply hollowed out. We'd pulled Daniel away from the glacier's edge after an hour of coaxing and cutting at the ice. His boots had fused so tightly into the glacier that the outer layers tore when we pried him loose. He hadn't even noticed the pain. He just kept murmuring, lips pale, eyes wide, and unnervingly calm. Back at camp, we tried again to get a signal. The satellite phone refused to connect. Julia's GPS tracker flickered between coordinates, placing us half a mile in one direction and then back again as if the glacier itself were shifting beneath the signal. It made no sense. The sky was clear, the elevation perfect for a line to the satellites. We were well within the range mapped out before we left. Chris grew increasingly agitated. His hands shook as he tried every trick he knew to reset the devices. One of our radios hissed with static, then let out a single sharp tone. Not a voice, not a signal. Just a note, like the pluck of a distant string instrument. Then silence again. Something was interfering. That was the word we kept avoiding. Interfering. Like there was something beneath the normal functioning of our tools, undercutting them. Not breaking them, distorting them. Warping them like a radio station bending under the weight of another signal. Later, Julia became quiet. Not the usual silence. This was different. She sat apart from the tents, staring down at the ice field below, unmoving. Her eyes weren't closed, but they weren't focused either. Her head cocked ever so slightly to one side, as if she were listening to something faint, something just below hearing range. When I approached her, she didn't acknowledge me. Her lips moved now and then almost rhythmically. Eventually, she said she could hear music, under the ice. A low melodic hum, not singing, not exactly but tonal. Something between whale song and a bowed cello buried in stone. She didn't describe it as threatening. She said it sounded beautiful, like something old, something familiar. Chris didn't believe her. Neither did I, but we didn't challenge her. There was no energy left for arguments. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I told them I was going to climb higher, just to the next ridge, to try and get a signal. They didn't argue. Julia didn't even respond. Chris nodded weakly and returned to fiddling with the dead radio. I packed light and left just after sunset. The air grew colder fast. The snow had hardened into brittle crusts, and the crampons scraped loudly with each step. Every few feet, I checked my phone. Still no signal. The glow of camp faded behind me. The ridge above was farther than I remembered. Maybe the light made it feel longer. Or maybe the ice was reshaping itself around us. Halfway up, I slipped. It was just a step. Nothing more. One wrong angle on a patch of windswept snow, and I went down hard. My axe bounced from my hand. I slid toward a narrow depression in the glacier. My feet kicked up sparks of ice. At the last moment, I managed to dig a boot edge in and halt myself just at the rim. Below me, the snow was thinner. Beneath that, the ice was almost glass. And under that, faces. Dozens. Packed in rows beneath the surface like fossils. Not buried, arranged. Their features distorted by the thickness of the ice, but distinct enough to make out. Eyes open, mouths frozen mid-scream or silence. Their skin was pale and stretched, their hands clawed upward. Some were old, some young. Some still wore the tattered remains of jackets and climbing gear. Others had nothing. One appeared to be smiling faintly, not from peace, but from the uncanny slack of muscles stretched too long in a single expression. I backed away, trembling, half crawling, half scrambling up the rest of the ridge. There was no mistaking what I'd seen. Not illusions, not tricks of light. Faces, beneath the ice, watching. And one of them, just one, looked exactly like Kevin. At the top, the wind howled. The air thinned. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the surrounding snowfields, looking for elevation. Looking for anything. That's when I saw it. A glint. Something metallic poking through the snow, just 10 feet ahead. I dropped to my knees and dug with my hands, scraping through ice-encrusted layers. My fingers were numb and raw when I pulled it free, a phone. Kevin's phone. His case was still on it, matte black with a tiny crack through the bottom corner. The screen was dim, but it came to life at my touch. The battery was at 12%. It was still on. I opened the camera roll first, scrolled past the photos I remembered him taking during the hike, the ridgeline, the group shots, the clouds blooming across the valley. Nothing unusual at first. Then I saw a video. It was timestamped sometime during the first night, when we were all in our tents, before the fog rolled in. I tapped play. The camera shook slightly. Kevin's face was close to the screen, eyes wide, whispering into the microphone. Behind him, the campfire crackled low. His voice was sharp and breathless. He said something was under the ice. Said it wasn't dead. Said it was waiting. He looked over his shoulder, then back to the camera. His last words trailed into static, and the video ended. I sat there in the snow, breath fogging around me, staring at the screen, trying to feel my fingers again. Then, just before the battery dipped to 10%, I checked the oldest photo on the phone. It was taken a day before we left. The timestamp confirmed it. Taken from his driveway, time-stamped with the date before our flight. Kevin stood in the foreground, grinning at the camera. Behind him, barely visible through the reflection in a window, was a glacier. And pressed up against the ice behind him, clear as day, was a face. Mouth open, hands clawing upward. It was already following us. Before we ever set foot on the ice. They were all gone by morning. Not gone in the physical sense. Not at first. Julia remained by the tent, knees drawn up to her chest, lips blue and parted, eyes glassed over with the same distant look she'd had the night before. Chris had wandered off in the early hours, saying something about hearing the rhythm again. I followed his tracks until they veered sharply across the ice, toward the sheer edge where Kevin's prints had vanished. I called for him until my voice broke. He never turned back. I returned to find Julia exactly as I'd left her. Still breathing, still sitting, still gone. She didn't eat, didn't respond. The only sound she made was a low humming, barely audible. A slow, circling melody, the same one she'd claimed to hear beneath the ice. I was alone. The camp shrank around me like something retreating from itself. The tents were motionless. The stove had run cold. Our footprints, those deep impressions we'd left behind in the snow, began to fade overnight. But not disappear. They changed. That's when I noticed it. The realization hit me like a drop of water finding its way into your sleeping bag. Small, cold, but unmistakable. The footprints were being mirrored, beneath the ice. Not in reflection, not illusion. They were embedded under the surface, shallow and distorted, just a few inches below where we'd walked. The path matched ours exactly, stride for stride, as though something beneath had been tracking every movement. From the start, when I walked, I watched the mirrored steps follow beneath, lagging by only a breath. When I stopped, it stopped. I tested it again, stepping to one side. A moment later, the distorted twin did the same, just under the ice, out of reach, like a shadow that had forgotten how to be still. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't turn my back on the ice. Instead, I built a trap. It wasn't much, just a trail cam we'd brought for wildlife shots, wedged into a small crevice of rock at the ridge. I aimed it directly at the glacier, at the place where the mirrored steps seemed most active. I secured it to trigger with motion, set it to record at intervals. I wasn't sure what I expected to see. Proof, maybe, or closure, or some final, impossible confirmation of the thing I already knew but couldn't accept. The night was quiet. The sky was empty. Even the wind had given up. When I checked the footage the next morning, the battery had nearly drained. I scrolled through empty frames, seconds of static darkness, faint stars twinkling in silence. Then movement, just a flicker at first, a ripple like the surface of the glacier had shifted ever so slightly. Then again, stronger. The snow didn't move, but something beneath it did. The camera caught a shape sliding just below the surface, long, thin fluid. It didn't crawl or slither. It drifted as if it didn't need to touch the ice to move through it. For a full minute, the thing circled just below the snow. Then it stopped directly in front of the camera. It pressed something against the ice. Not a face. Not quite. Something that had almost a face. The shape was elongated, distorted, vaguely humanoid, but stretched like something drawn from memory rather than reality. Eyes too far apart. No mouth, only a slit. The skin was pale, veined with dark blue shadows like cracks in old porcelain. It stared at the camera. Then it reached up, or out, and the video glitched. The next frame was static. I shut the camera off. I didn't watch the rest. That morning, I packed my gear. What little remained. Julia hadn't moved. Her hum had stopped. I checked her pulse, faint, steady. But there was no trace of recognition in her. A left food beside her, a water flask, a photo of the group from the day before the climb. It was all I could do. Then I went back to the glacier. I didn't bring a radio. I didn't try the phone. I didn't leave a marker. I followed the mirrored path, step for step, back to the place where Kevin's prints had ended, where Daniel had stood, where Chris had wandered into the fog. The ice groaned as I walked. It wasn't loud. It was deep, a resonance that didn't come from the surface, but from somewhere far below, like the glacier was exhaling. I stopped at the lip of the sheer. Looked down. The fog swirled beneath me like mist over deep water. The surface shimmered. I waited. Nothing came. So I stepped forward. I didn't fall. The surface accepted me, soft as breath. Cold spread through my boots, my legs. The ice didn't crack. It folded, and then I was beneath. I didn't scream. I didn't struggle, because by then I understood. It wasn't hunting. It was waiting. Final journal entry recovered from device cache. Day 7. Still no signal. Temperature stable. Julia unresponsive. The thing in the ice moved again last night. It was watching. It knows I'm alone now. I think I understand what it wants. I'm going back. I'm not sure what I'll find. Maybe Kevin. Maybe all of them. Maybe. Last image auto-uploaded from Trailcam. A photo. Grainy. Blurry. Taken from beneath the ice. Looking upward. A face at the surface. Pale. Eyes open. Mouth half-formed. Staring up. Still. Silent. Watching.